bifocal. Oh, excuse me. What you call them, dual focal?
Yes, dual lenses. Oh, he's giving me the thumbs up. Good evening, everyone. You get the award for the loudest response back to me, so yes. I don't have anything to give you, but you still won. I want to first start off by welcoming everyone out. This is our third community meeting, the one before the last one, which will be tomorrow. So I am excited to be back out in Southwest Little Rock to spend just an hour or a few minutes shy of an hour to give you a little bit of insight as to who I am, some insight into my background, and then talk about some of the opportunities and challenges we are facing within our district. So again, I want to officially welcome everyone for coming out. Unfortunately, tonight, this is not necessarily designed for a Q&A session, but we will be having community meetings, regional community meetings, quarterly throughout the year. And so during those times, we will have an opportunity to engage in Q&A. But don't worry, there are opportunities for you to engage with us tonight. It is just not in a Q&A format, but I'll share that with you a little later. So I see some familiar faces, some faces who have been here every single community meeting that we have had. And so if I call you up to co-present with me, because I'm sure you know just as much as I do about my background and myself and my life. And so, of course, he knows who I'm talking to, Mr. Ross. But I do appreciate all the support. So I'll just jump right in. For those of you who don't know who I am, how many of you don't know who I am? Okay. Oh, well, he may not, but the rest of you, I am Jamal Wright, and I am proud and excited to be the new superintendent here in Little Rock. And so I'll spend just a few minutes giving you a little bit of information about my background. I am originally from Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville, Florida is my hometown. I am Duval born and bred. Okay, third time, no reaction from Duval, so just, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Miss Elliott. All right, y'all wake up? I would ask for everyone to stand up and do 10 jumping jacks to get the blood flowing, but anyway, from Jacksonville, Florida, born and raised. On the playground is where I spent most of my days. All right, you got that one. This is a picture of, various pictures of my family, and I always show pictures of my family because those of you who know me or who have had some interaction with me since I have been here, it's very rare that I talk about myself without mentioning my family. These are my siblings. I am the last of 4 of my siblings. There are 5 of us, but there are 4 of us who are living. The baby of the family, and every stereotype that you know about the baby of the family, it applies to me probably times 10. These are my parents, Nathaniel and Helen Wright, and I could spend probably 5 hours just talking to you about my folks. Dad passed in 2013, but he is the most influential person in my life, and he is responsible for 96.6% of who I am today. He was the ultimate example of what it meant to work hard, to be a provider for his family. He had I don't even know the right word to describe his work ethic. So he was a pastor. He worked a 9-to-5, and in the last 13 years of his employment as a civil service worker on the naval base, one of the naval bases that we had in Jacksonville, he never missed a day of work. And so from, I don't know, I can't even remember how old I was when I started going to the Bahamas, but because of his perfect attendance, he would win trips, a family trip every year to the Bahamas. And so I was one of the few kids in my neighborhood who had the experience of being on a cruise ship. So much so to where I refused to get on a cruise ship as an adult. And I will never, ever, ever go back to the Bahamas because I can tell you by 8th or 9th grade, like I even remember begging not to go anymore because I was just sick of the Bahamas. But my dad I used to refer to him as mean. He was very mean, very strict, and I really didn't appreciate who he was or what he taught me, all the different examples that he taught me, pretty much until I became about 30 years old. And so we spent a lot of time in my early adult life. I had an opportunity to really share with him some things that kind of bothered me growing up. But again, the older I got, I realized how smart and how strategic he was and how he raised all of us. So before I get to my mama, you tell you the type of man my dad was. Pastor, worked at 95. He also was an entrepreneur. We owned a fuel oil company, my dad and my uncle. And I don't even remember what fuel oil did, but I remember back in the day we used to have the tanks, and I just know we had to drive around in the trucks and fill people's tank with kerosene, and that's the way that they got heat in the winter. And so I saw my dad working a lot. And today I'm still working, working a lot. But he was also the PTA president of pretty much every school that I attended. I remember when I graduated high school, he had an office within my high school and stayed at that school, continuing to work and serve long after I graduated. So people at my high school still remember my dad to this day. But despite all that my dad did and who he was and how present he was in my life, I am a mama's boy by heart. Every time my dad said no, my mom's name is Helen. I met another Helen a couple of weeks ago, and I will never forget her name. But every time my dad would say no, my mom always would say yes. Whenever I would ask my dad for, whatever the name brand shoes were at the time or the name brand clothing, he would always say no, unless I did chores or worked or did something around the house to earn money, which I never did. But my mom would find ways to find the money, even though she never worked a day in her life, and she would always make sure that I had not what I needed, but what I wanted. And so my mom is still living today. Some of you had an opportunity to meet her several weeks ago. She will be 89 September 1st, still driving, still taking care of herself, although we don't allow her to drive after 4 o'clock. And so sometimes I call at 6 or 7 just to see where she is, and she'll say she's at Bible study or I'm at choir rehearsal, and how did you get there? I drove. And anyway, one time I called, true story, I called her and Miss Hill, my next door neighbor, a retired teacher. I called and she said they were in Orlando at the outlet mall shopping. And I said, well, when do you plan on coming back? Well, we're gonna drive back tonight. No, you're not. But that's my mom. Let me speed up. These are my kiddos. These are old throwback pictures of my 3 children, Jaden, Josh, and Trinity. They are my broke best friends. They take every cent that I have and somehow find ways to keep asking and wanting more. My oldest is in the top left-hand corner. That's Jaden. He is getting ready to be a junior at Florida State. My daughter Trinity just graduated high school this past May, and we are battling it out for her future. I'm not going to tell the story about what, that'll take too long, but she's going to be okay. And then my youngest, Josh, down in the right-hand corner, he is will be starting as a junior as soon as he passes this summer school Algebra 2 course that he was not successful in a year. And so if I can just get him out of high school, that will be the greatest accomplishment of my life. And no exaggeration, I just want him out of high school. So I had a very interesting and unique experience growing up, probably similar to many of you in the room. With all the things that my family was involved in, I spent almost 80% of my time in church. Sunday morning service, Sunday school, BTU at 5 o'clock, night service, Bible study on Tuesdays. First Thursday of the month was church business meeting. That's all I did. That's all I knew. And so every leadership experience, early leadership experience that I had was from church. And so similar to probably many of you, the community in which I was raised and the ecosystem in which I was a part of, church, my community, really shaped and fashioned me into the person that I am today. I don't know why these pictures are here, but they're there. I'm going to come back to these folks in just a moment, but I When I went to undergrad at the University of North Florida. And growing up, I grew up on the north side of Jacksonville, which is probably similar to the southwest part of Little Rock. So all of my schools were majority black, except for, I believe, 1st through 5th grade, where I was bused across town to elementary school. My church was predominantly black. All of my civic involvement and activities were pretty much around people in my community who looked like me. And so it was interesting, my first experience in undergrad, I was at an institution where African Americans made up probably less than 10% of the entire population. And I always never felt inferior about who I was as a person just because of my race. I was always taught to be proud of who I am and not to look at myself inferior to anybody. And the people in which who raised me and were influential in my life really made me feel like I was the smartest person on earth, even though it probably was not true. And some of those individuals are pictured here. 2 of them are teachers of mine, and the other 2 are my pastors from Jacksonville. And so here in the University of North Florida, I took a course, introductory course, was Sociology of Education or Introduction to Sociology. I can't remember the exact name of the course. But in this course, we were reading one day, and the reading focused on various outcomes, various educational outcomes. And at the bottom of every single list, whether it was achievement, whether it was graduation rates, and probably the thing that stuck out to me the most, that I remember the most, was about special education, and how at the bottom of every list, it was African Americans, and then it was African American males. And so that was a seminal moment in my life, because it was the very first time where I felt a little, some type of way about being black. And in my particular class, I was one of few African Americans in the particular course. And so it was at that moment, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, but it was at that moment that I decided that as an educator, my mission, my goal, and my purpose in life was to make sure that any student that I encountered would not be one of the individuals who aligned to those statistics that I was reading in that particular course. And so that set the course for my career. I actually started my career in Christian education. My pastors that I mentioned here actually started a school, the Potter's House Christian Academy, which started out as a first year, 1996, the school was founded. We started with pre-K through 3rd grade. I came along the 2nd year. We added 2 grades, 4th and 5th. And every year afterwards, we added a grade until we reached pre-K to 12th grade. So I taught 5th grade there for 3 years. I taught middle school social studies for 3/4 of a year. Another long story, but I don't have time to talk about that tonight. But I taught there for 4 years, and I got married within those 4 years. And back then, public school teacher salaries were so much more lucrative than what I was making in the private sector. I believe when I first started teaching, my first salary was, I think, was like $19,000. And so got married. I decided I was going to make the big bucks and go over to public school. And so I taught a year in the public school system, and my pastors called me back and said, listen, the school is growing. I want you to come back and to serve as our first and our inaugural upper school principal. And so I served as principal of our 6th through 12th grade school until we graduated our first class of students in 2005, which were the same exact students that I started teaching my first year in 5th grade in 1997. So that was a very unique opportunity to graduate the same students that I began teaching in 1997. Left there, decided to go to the University of Florida. Go Gators! Oh, are you a real Gator fan? Oh, you really had my hopes up. This would have been the very first time someone would ever responded favorably to Go Gators. They are my favorite SEC team. Okay, moving on. Went to, started a doctorate program at the University of Florida in special education, and I also had to work, had a growing family at the time, and got a job as an assistant principal with the school district of Alachua County, or Alachua County Public Schools. Stayed here for a year. My pastors called me back again. my pastor's wife, who actually started the school, she was an educator, wanted to step away from the head of school role, and so they asked me to come back to serve as head of school, which I did for a year. After that year, I was recruited by the superintendent of Duval County Public Schools to be the principal of, it was a very low, I don't think it was the lowest performing elementary school in our district, but it was one of our turnaround schools who had received a grade of an F. And so my first public school principalship was here at SP Livingston Elementary School. And not going to get into all the details of my experience here, but I do want to highlight a couple of things that happened during my time here that still informs my practice and my vision and my focus today. One of those things were around ethical leadership. So in SP Livingston Elementary School, not only was there a regular neighborhood school of kindergarten through 5th grade students, we also served as one of 2 center schools in the entire district that housed students within our EBD program. And back then that was called Emotional Behavioral Disturbed. These are kids with alleged behavioral disabilities. And so my tour of the school, when they were taking me around, showing me the building, showing me the campuses, they took me to the back because, of course, you know, the kids that were in the EBD program was in the bike wing of the school, separated from everyone else. That wasn't surprising. But what was surprising was when I walked into those doors and walked up and down those hallways, it almost felt like you were in a prison. All you heard was screams, yelling. You would look into rooms. Every room had a timeout room within the room, and sometimes you'll see kids in the timeout room. The most striking thing about that experience was in the middle of that wing, there were 6 timeout rooms, 3 in the front, 3 in the back. And you would see them dragging kids down the hallway, putting them in a timeout room. The timeout rooms didn't lock, so they would sometimes take broom handles or some other types of things and stick them in the doors so that the kids couldn't come out. And so you would hear kids banging on the walls, banging on the door, yelling and screaming. And that wasn't the most disturbing thing. The most disturbing thing was the fact that when you looked at the student population, you can probably guess who comprised the overwhelming majority of kids who were back in the bike wing and the majority of the kids who were in those timeout rooms. Not only were they, I don't even know if there were, I don't remember a large number of African American female students. The overwhelming population were black males. And so I didn't have words to put with how I was feeling, but I knew that that wasn't right. And so another thing that was interesting about my experience here was that although they were an F school, when you looked at their data, they only tested 95% of the kids every single year, which was the minimum the minimum percentage of kids you were required to test. And so when I started looking at who was a part or who wasn't a part of that 5%, you can imagine who did not take the state assessment. It was all those 3rd through 5th graders in the EBD wing. And so my boss said to me, listen, we're already in F school. I need you to keep up this, she didn't use the term tradition, but I want you to keep doing what we've always done, which was excluding kids from the assessment. And so I was faced with an ethical decision at that point in time, and we tested 100% of the kids every year that I was there. So the first year, if we were already in F, can you imagine what our scores and our grades looked like after that first year when we tested 100% of the students? Take a guess. Any improvement? We went from an F to an F minus. Did you say F minus? All right. You also win a prize that, although there is no real prize other than a verbal acknowledgement of your efforts. Let me wrap this up, make this short. We eventually did show some improvement, but the improvement was an improvement that lasted past my tenure. So it was also during this experience that I learned there's no such way as test prepping your way out of being a failing school per se. There's no such thing as, you can do the test-taking gimmicks, you can teach kids test-taking strategies, but those aren't things that are going to sustain improvement year after year after year, and they do little to nothing to really help kids to learn and grow. What's that? Oh. So you can't test prep your way to better school grade, and you can't fire your way to school improvement. I was a very young administrator at this time. I don't remember how old I was, maybe 26, 27. And I came in with the attitude and the posture that, guys, you're failing school, and we're failing school because you all aren't doing a great job. And so since you are going to do a great job, I'm just going to fire everybody and rehire some more people and start all over. That doesn't work. And there was one senior teacher in my building, Miss Miller, who pulled me aside one day, and she said, "Young man, I need you to come into my classroom." I said, "Yes, ma'am." Came into the classroom, and I'm not going to tell you the exact word she said, but in today's terminology, she got me together very, very quickly, and she said to me, "I may not be the best teacher, I may not know the best strategies, I may have some things to learn, but you are going to treat me with respect." And so you'll often hear me say that I don't care what the challenge is, I don't care what the situation is, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, and that comes from the conversation I had with Ms. Miller years and years and years ago. Spent 2 years there, had a life-changing event, a divorce. Yeah, you can clap. I'm sorry. So decided that I wanted to get away from Florida. I had been in Florida my whole life, and I took this opportunity to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And ironically, I remember getting some random email. How many of you remember back in the day, well, I'm saying back in the day, I think it was 2002, when Michelle Reed became the chancellor of DC Public Schools? Yeah. So there was this national recruitment that she was doing to attract principals to come to Washington, D.C. So got this little email, had some things going on in my personal life, decided to throw my name in the hat. Long story short, got the job. They assigned me to be principal of Lecky Elementary School, and I spent 4 years here as principal, and it was the best principal experience of my entire life. I know I'm leaving out some funny stories, but I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep going. Well, I have to tell this one. All right. So if you, I don't know why I'm struggling with my right from my left. Bottom left-hand corner, does anyone know who that is? The guy sitting down in the chair that I'm speaking to. Yep, that's Marion Barry. How many of you know who Marion Barry is? All right. Marion Barry was a former mayor of Washington, D.C. At this time when I was there, I believe he was on the city council. He wasn't mayor anymore. But if you know the story about him, I'm not going to tell the story. But what happened was, my slick mouth made a comment to my secretary and some other staff members about him in reference to some of his past demons that he was dealing with. And little did I know, my school was in Ward 8, which was his ward. Little did I know was how well respected and revered Marion Barry was. And so the very next day, this picture was taken as I was walking into the building. It was in the summer, so we didn't have kids in the building. Was walking in the building down the hallway, and his chair is seated right next to the exterior part of my office. And I had another Miss Miller conversation. This time it was with Marion Barry. And so the lesson I learned that day is never to say anything foul or negative about Marion Barry, because he is still a powerful, influential figure at that time in D.C. So anyway, moving on. I know I'm running out of time, but we were again a low-performing school when I arrived. The great thing about this experience is I had an opportunity to apply all of the things I had learned from all of the mistakes that I made in my other principalship experience. And so before I get to some of the things that we achieved, I want to talk about how. And so it was here that I learned the power of teacher leadership, before teacher leadership became the big word or the buzzword that it is now. I had a principal coach who set me down one day and said, as of today, you will no longer do all the stuff that you're accustomed to doing. You're not going to lead any more data meetings. You're not going to facilitate all the planning meetings. I mean, it was so bad, you all, I would analyze all my teachers' data for them. I would identify the standards that they needed, the parts of the standards that they needed to reteach. In some cases, I will be so anal and actually script out their reteaching plans for them to do. And so she sat me down and said, you're never going to build capacity in the people on your staff if you hoard and continue to try to do every single thing. So she asked me to identify 2 of my strongest teachers. I did. She said, give me a couple of weeks to work with them. And I'm going to fast forward. In 4 years, I did very little at the school other than drive. I did morning duty. I had all the kids in the cafeteria that I would play games with them so that the teachers could. I did lunch duty every day. I did recess duty every day. And then I went home. That was the extent of my day because the teachers and adults and staff in my building, they had taken ownership and responsibility for every operation within that school building. My secretary was the borderline assistant principal. I didn't have an AP, but my secretary pretty much did a lot. So teachers learn more from their peers than they do from anybody in a formal leadership role. And so that was a lesson learned there. Focus on early literacy. You remember me talking about you can't test prep your way out. And so I figured that if we can't test prep our way out of school improvement, that I needed to start with children as early as humanly possible to close and address all of the gaps that they have as soon as they enter the school building. And so this is where I began a focus on early literacy and early numeracy, making sure that those gaps close. It's probably still true today, everybody always paid attention to 3rd grade and up because those are the grades that took the state assessment. My approach here was to focus not solely, but to focus a lot of our time and attention on pre-K, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. By the time my 2nd graders got to 3rd grade, our results were just, I'm saying they were just, but I can't think of a word to put at the end of the sentence. They were great. So in 4 years, we moved from what was the equivalent of a D to the designation of a B or rising. We increased reading proficiency from 26 to 47, math from 31 to 60. We were one of 8 schools in the whole city, not just in Ward 8. One of 8 schools district-wide to achieve significant and sustained progress for 3 consistent years for Black students in reading and in math, and you see those percentage points there, and you see some other things there. The thing that I'm proudest of the most is when I left, parents petitioned the chancellor. They did not want their kids to leave 5th grade to go to the local middle school, so they asked if they can add 6th grade. So they added 6th grade, they added 7th grade. They are a K-8 school to this very day, and they have never lost their designation since I left in 2013. And so that was proof that when you put the right types of systems in place, when you build and empower your teachers to really take ownership and responsibility of the school, and when you set the path for making sure that your babies in pre-K, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, they get everything that they need and more, achievement will continue. Left there, that was my 10th year being a principal, and I figured I had had enough, so it was time to branch out and do something else. Didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but what I did know is that I wanted to complete my doctorate. You remember me mentioning that I started at University of Florida, but I never completed it. So again, I got another one of those random emails, and I still cannot to this day figure out where this email came from. But I got this email that talked about a federally funded doctoral program that happened to be housed at the University of Colorado, Denver. And the focus was, of course, on leadership, but the specific focus was on early childhood special education. And in the specializations you could choose from, one of the things that I was most interested in, which was behavioral, or kids with challenging behavior. And so applied, got into the program. I was one of 10 students across the nation who was accepted. These are my five members of my cohort when I started the program at Denver. Didn't know where Colorado was on the map. I had to look and study it because wasn't quite sure where it was, didn't know anybody there, but I moved to Denver, started that program, and needed a job, and got one. Ended up being hired as the instructional superintendent for the elementary network in Denver. So Denver was a 90,000+ student district, and so my first job, they gave me had about 21 schools in the southeastern part of Denver, which is the most affluent area within Denver. And so I was given charge to oversee, I was going to say school improvement, but they were all high-performing schools. It was the most boring job I think I have had. And not only was it boring, the thing that I had to deal with the most, I'm sure if I took a poll, you would probably guess, was parent issues. And the parent issues stem from this. In Denver, pretty much every single one of my schools, we had very active PTAs. These PTAs would raise upwards of $1 million+ every single year through silent auctions to all these other types of activities. And they use money to purchase or to buy teacher assistants. Every single teacher, kindergarten through 5th grade, in all of my schools had a teacher assistant, most of which, in some cases all of which, were funded by money raised from the PTA. And so if Miss Williams was not happy that her daughter was in Mr. Wright's class and she wanted him in Miss Susie's class, those are the types of emails and phone calls that I got day in and day out. How long do you think I lasted? Close. 2 months. I lasted 2 months. I walked into my boss's office and said, either you can have this or you can give me something else to do. And of course, I came in with a proposal. And I asked her at the time, just give me the lowest performing schools, elementary schools we got in Denver. Let me work with them for a few years. Just let me do that. And so they created a network just for me, which was called the Transformative Network. Here are some of my school leaders pictured here. Several of them are listed there. And I don't know why I have the picture of snow. I think I have this picture of snow because I don't care if it was 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. Like, schools never closed. Like, never. That has nothing to do with my story, but anyway. So long story short, you look at the how. I'll get to what we were able to achieve, but you see many of the same things here that you saw as a principal. This time I just had multiple schools. The interesting thing about the schools that I led in Denver was that they were all majority Hispanic. And about half of them received all of their instruction in Spanish. They were taught all of their instruction in Spanish from pre-K till about 2nd grade, and 3rd grade about half and half. And all along the while, they were learning English in a English language development block during the day. And then, of course, by 4th and 5th, they were, if the model worked correctly, they transitioned to receive all of their instruction in English. How much Spanish do I speak? None. But I was leading schools where the majority of the instruction was in Spanish. So the thing I learned from this experience is the same strategies that work for students who are learning English are some of the same strategies that work for English speakers who are also struggling with English and learning how to read. Not going to go through all the things in the how column, but very similar to what you saw on the previous slide. After a period of 3 years, well, 2 years and 8 months, if you take off the 2 months that I served in the Southwest. You were supposed to laugh there. Anyway, 50% of the schools moved from red or F to yellow. 25% moved from red to green, and all of the schools were no longer eligible for state intervention. And what I failed to mention here in Colorado, we had a very aggressive state laws. And so when you were a failing school for more than 3 years, you were either closed, converted to a charter, made into an innovation school. You had to get rid of all the staff and start all over. So it was very real for the schools that had an opportunity to serve. So that was an example of change at the regional level. I left, and what I failed to mention all this time, my kids are flying back and forth, I'm flying back and forth. They live with me for part of the year, they're back in Florida for part of the year, and that airfare and travel from Florida to Denver almost sent me into chapter 11 or 7? Whatever chapter where you don't have any money. That's where I almost was. And so I wanted to get back to Florida, so I was hoping to land a job in Hillsborough County, which is in Tampa. They had some leadership transition, so by the time they made me the offer, it was too late. I'd taken a job with my mentor in Philadelphia, who just recently retired as being the superintendent for 10 years. I was only there for a year, so there's not much to talk about here. Just know that I was there. Was recruited to come back down south, which was going to put me about 5 hours away from Jacksonville, which will work out. I can get back and forth to my kids' games and activities and wouldn't have to miss as much. And so I took a job in the great state of Alabama at the State Department of Ed in Montgomery. Yeah. This was probably the first time that I did very little to no research in terms of what I was getting myself into. I grew up in Florida, and I thought I was from the South. I would always describe myself when I was in D.C. and Denver and Philly and other places. Yeah, I'm from the South. It wasn't until I got to Montgomery, Alabama, that I realized I was not from the South, because this is a different type of South here. So I was recruited to Alabama by the new state superintendent who they hired from Massachusetts. Yeah, let that sink in. The new state superintendent for Alabama came from Massachusetts, and one of the first decisions he made was to take over the school district that was in the capital city, Montgomery Public Schools. And guess who was assigned the task to oversee the state's intervention into Montgomery Public Schools? I had no idea what I was walking into. I'll just sum it up by saying this. He was gone in about 6 months. And I had to get out of there before they found me somewhere else, and I'll just leave it at that. So I ended up going to Birmingham. Y'all are laughing more than the other crowds, and so I appreciate that. Thank you. Ended up going to Birmingham City Schools, where I served as the Chief Academic and Accountability Officer for 2 years. And here I had a chance this was my first time having to have the ability to impact change at the entire district level. So I'd been a principal, had a network of schools that I led. This was my very first time as a district level administrator to impact change throughout the entire system. Run out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of this. But Birmingham at the time had more Fs than any other school district in the state of Alabama. And doing some of the things you see here, had to kind of do a lot of work to restructure the way in which we were structured as a district to make sure that teaching and learning was going to be the thing that we focused and prioritized the most, and making sure that our system was organized in a way to be able to support teaching and learning. This is where I met Melissa Goody, who's back in the room. Melissa Goody is our new Chief Academic Officer. She's been here now for a couple of weeks. It's also where I met Mr. Lee, who's sitting next to her. Mr. Lee is my executive assistant. He has been with me since Birmingham, came to Mississippi, where I most recently was, and is now here in Little Rock. I forgot where it was just that quick. All right. So all of that stuff you see, you can read the how. We decreased the number of Fs from 22 to 6, increased the number of schools rated C and above from 6 to 17, blah, 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 blah. This was hard work. This was extremely hard work. And so I know I'm leaving out a lot of details, but it was hard work. And the biggest work was really impacting and changing the perspective and attitudes of adults to do the work. Birmingham, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the city as they are here in Little Rock. We had very high achieving schools, a few, and then the rest of our schools were just not doing well at all. And we had to do a lot of work to help to change the mindsets. Well, we never really changed the mindsets of adults. We had to put in some structures to make sure that we held folks accountable to do the work that needed to be done. So after those 2 years, I felt that I was ready to take the plunge into the superintendent world. And so people always ask, how in the world did you get to Mississippi? Was anybody else wondering that? Well, back in DC, my chief academic officer, her name was Dr. Jamal Wright. She just retired as the state superintendent for Mississippi. She was the state superintendent there for about 9-10 years. And if you've kept up with the progress Mississippi has made over the last 10 years, you can no longer say that Mississippi is at the bottom of anything. We used to be 49. they, because I'm not there anymore, have made tremendous progress, especially in the area of literacy, to where I think for the last 2 or 3 years, Mississippi was one of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 school districts throughout the entire country that saw significant improvement in literacy rates and tremendous growth from some of the lowest performing students in our state. And so I think now as a whole, when you look at the latest NAEP results, we may be around 36, 35. And that's a long way from being at 50, where the state had been for quite some time. Came there and applied, got the job, didn't know what districts or what districts that they were going to assign to me. They created this district called the Mississippi Achievement School District, which was designed to provide support to the lowest performing districts in the state. And so after I got the job, I found out that I was assigned Yazoo City and Humphreys County, which are all in the Mississippi Delta. Had to take out a map to figure out where it was because I had no clue. But this was a, I see Mr. Hodo back in the room. Mr. Hodo, new principal at Southwest High School here, was one of the first principals that I hired when I got there, and he was principal at Humphreys County High School. I have never seen such poverty in all the days of my life. And so I'm accustomed to working in urban schools, I'm accustomed to working in urban environments, accustomed to working in urban districts. But there is and some of you are already aware of this, it just took me a while to learn it myself, but there is a tremendous difference between urban poverty and rural poverty. A tremendous difference. And I don't think I was prepared, and still not prepared to this day, to see some of the things that I saw in terms of how a lot of our students and families were living. Growing up, definitely not rich, but even in a low-income area of town that I grew up in, you still had access to a grocery store. You still had access to hospitals. I had one of teacher assistants in my district who literally died. She had complications. She was pregnant and was having complications, and to get to the nearest emergency room or the nearest hospital, that's at least an hour's drive. I try to eat right. I'm not always successful. But working here, I had to pack my lunch every single day because there was nowhere you could go to eat to find healthy food. So these places have children, just like children all over the world. And the unique thing about the kids in the area in Yazoo City and Humphreys County, they are no different than children that I've encountered anywhere else. Had the same needs, the same drive, was just as smart and tenacious as kids I've seen in other places. They just lacked resources within their community and within the school districts. And so this was the hardest work of my life. And people ask, why did you leave? I left because this was the very first job that I ever had that was simply not sustainable. I was working, if there was 27 hours a day, I was working 29, 7 days a week. The need was so great, the resources were so few. Being that the state took over the district, I was hoping and was even promised, I was gonna say to some degree, but that's not to some degree, I was promised some additional resources to kind of help with the work because there was little to nothing there. 3 years I got nothing. So the only funds I had to work with were the funds that were generated by the local school district or the funds that we received by the state. And so you can imagine what the local funding looked like because there wasn't an economy. Nobody owned homes, and so I think in both districts I may have maybe a little over $3 million a year that we receive from local funds. That's not even enough to cover payroll for a school. And so working in a place like that for 3 years with no fiscal resources, hardly any human resources, in places where, you talk about 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years worth of neglect, Nobody in, I don't know if there are similarities between the Delta in Arkansas and the Delta in Mississippi. I would imagine that there are probably some. But nobody really cared what was happening out in the Mississippi Delta, and so people just turned a blind eye, and it was what it was. But even in those dire situations, we still were able to achieve some outcomes that improve life outcomes for the children that we serve. How? Prayer, fasting, and my favorite, beverages. Some of you got that. Some of you didn't get it. That was the only way to make it through. Some of you are still laughing. Anyway, but we did improve graduation rates from 67 to 85%, 78 to 91%. Mr. Hodo was instrumental in us achieving these graduation rates. We only had 2 high schools. He was the principal of one. And it was easy because the district was small. We had about 4,000 kids total. And so it was easy to figure out who the kids were. I mean, with a district that size, you can singly point out the kids are going to be at risk for dropping out. They hadn't achieved enough credits, they were having issues, and so we created what was called, I'm drawing a blank, Success Center. The Success Center that focused on our overage middle school and high school students, and just from focusing on that target population, we were able to raise our grad rates. Of course, both districts had lost their accreditation. We restored accreditation just by focusing on some of those compliance things that we had issues with, mostly around personnel, finances, special education issues. I believe when I got there, we had. So let me tell this one story, which will give you insight as to how challenging this situation was. I had one elementary school, the largest elementary school in our district, who was the lowest performing elementary school in the entire state. And so when I arrived, there were 10 third grade sections in this one school. And in Mississippi, if you didn't pass the third grade reading test, you were retained. 10 third grade classes in this one school, 1 certified teacher. All the rest were long-term subs, and it was a revolving door of subs, so it wasn't even consistent. That's just how dire the situation was. We only had about 65% of our teachers who were licensed. The rest were long-term subs. And so I think after our first year, we got close to 100% certified teachers, and I think by the second year, we were licensed. So we had a lot to overcome there. All right, running out of time. So left there, decided that I knew that work wasn't going to be sustainable, and had I stayed there, I would probably be not in good mental or physical health. It was just taking that much out of me. So I did my research. Every superintendent search that I participated in, I think there were 3, I applied for positions strategically. And one of the things that really attracted me to Little Rock, especially because of all the financial issues I had in Mississippi, was I really studied the finances here in our district. And we are a fiscally healthy district with lots of resources, lots of programs, probably way too many, and lots of partnerships, and an interest in just about everybody I've met since I've been here, regardless of who they are, regardless of their political affiliation, philosophical differences. I don't think I've met a person yet who does not want to see the Little Rock School District be successful. And so applied, got the job, standing before you today, giving you a little bit of information about myself and my background, and I'm excited to be here. So real quick, a lot of good stuff going on in our district. I've spent the whole month of June before I officially started just engaging in conversations with people around the city, whether it was elected officials, community members, staff, whomever. I've had the chance to groups, businesses, had the chance to learn as much as I can about the city and about the district. And I have a list of things that people say they love about the Little Rock School District, and there's a lot to love about our school district. There's also a lot of work that we need to do. And so while we want to celebrate the things that we do well and celebrate the accomplishments and the achievements that we've made, we've got a lot of work to do, mainly around student outcomes. Our core business, we are in this business to do one thing and one thing only, and that's teaching and learning. That's to make sure that kids leave our system prepared to do whatever they want to do. They should be literate enough to do whatever they want to do. They should know enough math to do whatever it is that they want to do. That's our job. Student outcomes, I'll talk about that in a minute. We've had some challenges around enrollment declines, and we know that enrollment is tied to money. And the more we lose students, the more funding we lose, which impacts our ability to provide equitable programs to all of our students, and then the culture of our system. 4 things mentioned there, but I'm only going to talk about one, which is stakeholder engagement. First, I'm going to start with student outcomes. All right, these are our 5-year graduation rates over the last 5 years. You see a slight decrease in our grad rates when you look at all of our students. When you look at all of our students combined, although you do see a slight increase from 2020 to 2021, overall, our grad rates have gone down. A decrease in Hispanic, gifted, and talented graduation rates for 4-year graduates. Now, if there's one population we should be graduating without much effort, it should be our gifted and talented students. We see a decline in the percentage of those students, that subgroup, who are graduating. Decrease in students with disabilities, although you see a slight increase from 2020 to 2021. Bottom line, on average, we graduate about 80% of our students every single year. I see Dr. Cummings in the back. I had her to run some numbers for me today because I've consistently said we graduate about 80% of our students, but I wanted to know, I wanted to quantify that 20% to see how many kids we're talking about. 20%, I can't remember the numbers. I think it's on average, we graduate about 1,600 kids every single year. 20% of 1,600 is about 320. So it's 320 kids every single year that do not graduate our system. 20% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you added the number to it, that's 300 kids, 320 kids every single year. And we already know the implications of being a high school dropout. We don't need to list them, we don't need to talk about them. None of them are good. Come on, all right. These are our math scores for the last 5 years. I'm gonna really speed through this, you all, so, not that fast. You see one area where our students are performing higher in math than they were in 2017, and that's in 10th grade, and that's at 19%. Look at the state average. The state average is not great. Now, let me just be honest. So we use the ACT Aspire here in the state of Arkansas. I think we have one more year of the Aspire. Arkansas is the only state who is using the ACT Aspire. It is probably not the best assessment for us to be making inferences and taking other information from, but it is what it is. My belief is, I don't care how bad the test is, if kids are taught, they still should be able to perform. We shouldn't be at 19, 20, 39%, even if the test is bad. Science. We've got one area, 8th grade science, where kids are performing better than they were 5 years ago. And we know the pandemic, impacted us. But when you look at 2019, which was before the pandemic, is still not that much of a difference. So English scores, and this deals with grammar. And here's reading. I could stay here all day and talk about the implications of producing 1,600, well, not 1,600, but of our 1,600 kids, and I'm making some unscientific statements, but I'll just take the highest number there, 38%. 38% of our 1,600 kids who are graduating, we're sending out, and they may not have the best of literacy skills. So we've got lots of work to do. Enrollment declines. We already know the impact of enrollment on our funding. Here's our enrollment over the last 10 years. We're down 1,860 students prior to the pandemic from where we were back in 2012. After the pandemic, we are down 3,043 kids. The good news is between 2021 and 2022, we are up 442 students. And so we are hoping that we see some sustained increases in our enrollment over the next few years. Same information, but it's broken down by elementary, middle, and high. We see that we lose the overwhelming most of our students in the elementary level. In my mind, I was thinking it was middle school, but it's actually at the elementary level. You'll notice that in middle school, we are actually enrolling more students today in our middle schools than we were 10 years ago. 4,900 to 5,363 this past school year. All right, I've got 5 minutes. I can do it. With regards to the culture of our organization, again, I'm only going to focus on one thing, and that's stakeholder engagement, which is the reason why you all are here today. I really hope that you coming out today is not just a one-time event. Now, we know that people work, we know that people have schedules, and so we as a district we've got to figure out a better way to engage our stakeholders, because we need you to be partners with us in this process of making our district better. We need to know your ideas, we need to know your thoughts. We've got lots of challenges before us, we have lots of critical decisions to make in the future, and we are going to be depending upon you all to help us figure out the decisions that we need to make sure that our district is in good health and that it is performing the best that it can possibly perform. So there are several things that we will have in place to engage various factions of our stakeholder groups. And so we'll have several advisory councils that I'll meet with on a monthly basis, students, teachers, classified advisory council, all of the individuals voluntarily applied to be a part of these. We're still finalizing our student advisory group. It will be made up of 8th through 12th graders. And I think we almost have a representative from every middle and high school in our district, with the exception of 2 schools, and I know that those principals are working on identifying students from those schools. Teacher Advisory Council, we've got about 53 teachers representing all levels across our district, and about 40-something individuals that will be serving on our classified employee group. These groups are not created just for the sake of us just coming together to waste time. Nobody has time to waste. These folks will be working to help address, 2 things. Helping us address the challenges and issues that we have in our district, and when I meet with them, they'll be working on specific things. But then number 2, making sure that I, as a superintendent, am really grounded in the actual experiences that our employees and students are experiencing in our district every single day. Parent Advisory Council, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do this. It is hard to bring parents together because of work schedules and other different type of commitments. Right now, we're focusing on using our Pta Executive Council, which I probably know is not probably not the best group to use, but that's what I'm going to start out with. And unfortunately, they meet during the day, and it is comprised of representatives from every single school. But we'll have to figure out and find ways to engage parents in some other ways. But that's how we're starting. Have a principals roundtable group. There won't be a community advisory council, but like I said, we'll be hosting these meetings quarterly. And in between the quarterly meetings, I do have several groups that I meet with, or will be meeting with on a monthly basis, representing faith-based, civic groups, business groups, and even grassroots groups. Wait a minute, I didn't say that right. Grassroots groups, some of which I just met, some of which I have just been meeting within the last couple of weeks, in addition to various cultural groups throughout the city. All right, so in the 1 minute that I have left, you should have received a little handout or pamphlet or small sheet of paper. There are 3 questions that are listed there, but what I really want to know from individuals within this room, and then there's 2 ways you can complete it. You can actually complete the physical piece of paper, or if you have your smartphone, there is a QR code that you can scan, and you can answer those questions on your devices, and the responses will come directly to us. The question that I'm most interested in is, what are the top 3 priorities you would like to see LRSD address? So as a parent, community member, staff member, whoever you are, what do you want to see us focus and prioritize as a district? We'll be collecting these responses, categorizing the responses after our last meeting tomorrow. And again, I hope you realize that we're just not doing this to go through the motions, emotions. We're just not doing this to be doing it. We're doing this because we really, truly want to engage you as partners in this process. And so this is your opportunity this evening to tell us what is important to you. So please take the time to complete that. If you complete the card, turn it in to, as you're walking out the door at the table. And if not, use your QR code and complete it on your device, and we'll get those responses. So while you're doing that, I lied earlier because I said I wasn't going to entertain questions, but I'm feeling a little okay today. And so if there are any burning questions from anyone in the audience, I'll take a few, and then after that, we'll just close out. Again, appreciate you all for coming out. Hopefully you found this somewhat meaningful. If you didn't, just lie to me and tell me that you really enjoyed coming out this evening. Yes, sir. Of course, yes. To do so, just see Mr. Lee right back in the back. Raise your hand, Mr. Lee. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
I was just curious about why equity is not first, and if that means anything in the order in which they're up there.
Nope.
So I just think it'd be a great message to say to the community that equity is first.
Yep.
I think everybody believes in accountability, but sometimes it's like, this is the first thing I'm going to do, when we've all been just waiting for equity to be behaving.
Does everybody, do you mind repeating that with the microphone? I just want to make sure everybody hears you.
Well, I was just asking if the order was significant, and if not, I was wondering why equity is not the very first thing up there, because that's the thing that we've been needing in our school district for so long. And I think that would send a great message if equity is the very first thing. And that sometimes when people see accountability, it's not that they're against accountability, but it's been misused and used as a bludgeon so much. Sometimes when people see that's the very first thing, they get turned off. So I'd like to reel everybody in with equity and then start the other stuff. That's my thought.
Point well taken. And the very next time you see this slide, equity will be number 1. And that's not just because she said it, but because it's true. We have an enormous amount of equity issues in our district, and it's going to take us all to undo them and to address them. So just to kind of give you like a foresight of what I'm talking about, I'm just going to take an issue, and I still haven't fleshed this out exactly how this will play out. School boundaries is always a hot button issue. And I can tell you in our district, you've heard the term gerrymandering, right? So we all know the political connotation with gerrymandering. Our boundaries for schools that do have boundaries, because a lot of our magnet programs necessarily don't, but we're going to have to get to a point very, very soon, especially with the opening of the new Marion J. Lacey building and the new high school out west. We're going to have to relook at how we draw boundaries. And for a new superintendent in a new place, two things that'll make your tenure very, very short. That's messing up people's boundaries, closing schools, actually three. Well, those two things are the top two things that come to mind. And unfortunately, I don't find myself in a position to where I'm going to be able to kick that can down the road for too long and not do anything about it, because the way things are happening, we're going to have to address it. And so the way that I'm not going to address it is to come to a community meeting and say, these are your 5 options. I'll send Ms. Hatter to do that, but it won't be me. But what I'm really interested in is, let's take an area of town. Are there any community groups or folks who want to take a stab at helping us figure out the best way to do it? We may have a meeting one day where, in this side of town or this section of town, you bring your ideas in terms of how we could redraw our boundaries, and let us hear from you. And I'm hoping, the best decisions most times aren't always in the organization itself. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And so I'm hoping that if we open up opportunities for folks within the community to help us authentically solve some of our big challenges, that we may hear something that may resonate with us that we haven't thought about, that can help us solve some of our problems in non-traditional ways, or ways in which we hadn't necessarily thought of. And so those are examples of the types of things that we want to do to authentically involve the community in actually helping us address and solve some of the issues that we had. Yes, ma'am? I think the best approach for a community or for a volunteer is to probably attach yourself to one school. I would say find a school that is near and dear to you for whatever reason, contact that school's administration, and then see what is the best way in which you can volunteer or make a meaningful contribution. I think the more you spread yourself out, the less impactful it will be.